Welcome to the Next Best Thing podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Cline-Thomas. Now, I'm here to help you live the life that you designed so you don't have to choose the life you think you have to settle for. Today, I'm very excited. We have a very, very special guest. Her name is Lydia Hamilton. Now, I first became aware of Lydia when she was recently on the Tamron Hall Show.
Think about this. Going on a vacation is a highlight for anyone, right? Doesn't matter where you're going. But our next guest wanted something a little more thrilling than just, a simple road trip or a weekend getaway. First, she started volunteering on a farm. She volunteered on a farm in Tennessee, which turned into boating in Antarctica, then led to surfing in Barbados. But that's not all. I love it. But that's not all. World traveling opened up Lydia to the possibilities of where she wanted to go and what she could do with her life. She ended up spending 50 days traveling across 8 countries and visiting 14 different cities and had an experience she said completely transformed her life.
Okay. I had to figure out who she was, right? I was like, where is this lady? She lives in Philly. I almost started texting my Philly friends to try to find her, but I found her online because I had so many more questions, right? I was like, how can I get this lady on the podcast? And thankfully, she said yes. Now, I saw so much of my own story and hers specifically needing a hard reset and having to get brutally honest. Now, Lydia found her answers through what she calls transformational travel.
There were 3 main goals that I set out to do during this whole 6-month kind of career break, personal break period. And they were 1, to understand the next chapter personally, 2, to understand the next chapter professionally, and then 3, and arguably most important, was to become unshakably clear in who I am, independent of anyone else.
In this episode, Lydia not only explains her dope travel experiences that will have you expanding what is already on your bucket list, but she explains how a divorce and subsequent depression really led her to this career break, and when she emerged from the fog, but also how she emerged from the fog. This is a super special episode. I was fangirling a little bit too. So I can't wait for you to hear it and watch it. Please let me know what resonates with you. Okay, here is Lydia. Well, Lydia, girl, I have been waiting for this conversation because let me tell you what, when I watched the Tamron episode, what is on YouTube, and before it was done, I was already looking for you. I was like online, like searching for you before your episode was, your segment was done. Cause I was like, I have got to talk to her. There is so much more I want to know. So thank you for being here. I'm so excited for this.
Thank you for the invite. I'm so excited to dive in and have this convo because we got things to discuss.
We got lots to talk about. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's first start about, because I can't do your travels justice. Kind of tell us first, we'll dig into why, but first tell us, where did you go and what did you do? Tell us about this adventure.
Wow. So this was about 6 months total. And it all started off with me working on a farm. I just had like this thing where I was like, I want to go on a farm. I found a hobby farm just outside the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. And so I was a farmhand volunteer for 2 weeks and cared for 2 horses, a donkey, and a pony. And they had 3 cats as well. So I'd work on the farm during the day and then I would hike in the afternoon. And it was just the most peaceful period of time. And then from there, I headed to Antarctica with one of my good girlfriends. We take a trip every year together. I call her my wanderlust partner. And so every year we pick somewhere far and away to go. And we had been talking about Antarctica since 2016, 2017 or so, after we had made a trip to Australia. She said to me, this is the furthest we can travel from the US. Technically, everywhere is closer, including Antarctica. And I was like, I like that logic. You're right. And so we got in the seventh continent together, and that was just absolutely amazing, going on these Zodiac rides in the ocean and seeing all the wildlife and just enjoying that entire experience. And then went to Barbados, which was like my just do nothing point of my journey, where I literally just wanted to sit on the beach, have a cocktail, float in the ocean, because I'm a total water baby. I love the water,
Hmm.
and just do a whole lot of nothing. But I'm a hint of a busybody too. And so after I had so many days of doing nothing, I decided to learn how to surf. And so I took surfing lessons. And then, has a couple other trips sprinkled in. But then the big one, which was the one that kind of caught the attention of the show as well, was where I took this near 50-day solo trip through a lot of Asia and ended up in Greece. And so it went to Hong Kong, Macau, Japan, Vietnam, India, um, Greece, and Singapore, and Malaysia. It was 8 countries and about 14 stops over that period. So every 4 to 6 days or so, I was on a flight going to a new city and just doing what I call transformative, immersive travel, really wanting to understand how the people are living and what they're eating and what they're doing beyond just your traditional tourism experience. So lots of places over that period of time.
And how did you pick the places and pick the things that you were going to do while you were there?
So this is a really interesting part, because when I knew I was going to take this 6 month career break, I said, all right, I know I'm going to take a really big trip somewhere in, this journey. And I decided to go to one of the continents that I was least traveled to, because at this point in time, I'd gone to all 7 continents. And the three that I still need to do way more exploration in are Asia, Africa, and South America. And so I had earlier last year come off the heels of a couple trips in Africa and had done a few in South America. And Asia was just not only the least traveled for me, but also the furthest that I could go. And so it just logistically made sense to me to let me go as far as possible while I have this uninterrupted period of time. And then really, I just kind of let the interest that I had in mind lead me. I started doing some preliminary research around what would be interesting to see. And then that is what shaped the countries. And now the really interesting part is when it came down to the activities that I did when I was there rather. Um, I kind of had a set routine where I let my typical nature of controlling everything go. And I
Mm.
would arrive in every city with no plan.
Wow.
Yeah, I just arrived, I talked to locals, and then I would do research on bucket list activities. And that's how I had unusual things that I fell into. Um, one in particular that I will call out is when I was in Tashua, Vietnam, which is like the high mountainous region of Vietnam. And I was having a conversation before I got there with a young couple when I was checking in for my flight. And they were sharing with me that the husband is from the area and was, just giving me some things to do. And he said, there's one really cool thing that you could do, and it's called cloud hunting. And I was like, what's cloud hunting? It's this rare atmospheric phenomenon where the clouds hang exceptionally low, and you can literally ride a motorbike through the clouds, through the mountains, see these amazing cloud formations. And so I arranged for a transport to take me up into the mountain region, and literally got on the back of somebody's motorbike that the homestay had arranged for me and rode through the clouds for 3 hours. And that was probably the most, you know, I wouldn't call it the most noteworthy, but it was one of the most amazing things that I did amongst a ton of others as well.
Real quick, are you enjoying this conversation? Because I am just getting so much from it. And if you love content like this, go ahead and hit subscribe. Not only will it ensure that you never miss another episode, it will make sure that content like this gets in front of more people so we can transform more people's lives. Hit subscribe, rate and review. I really appreciate it. All right, let's go ahead back into the episode. Oh, gosh. Let's talk about how you got to this moment. Now, on your website, you say, what does it mean when you're a high performing professional who has hit a brick wall? When the lines of work and life have become so blurred and challenging, you don't know which way is up or down. When everything just feels downright hard and every hurdle seems impossible to jump over. Oh,
That's heavy, right?
it's so much, but it's so relatable.
Yeah,
It's so relatable.
I say I kind of got to this point where there was this tension point. There was work, which was exceptionally demanding. I was a vice president of operations in a news media org. And then I had life that was pulling on the opposite side. And the life that was pulling on the opposite side is I had just come out of a divorce. I had been with my ex husband for 16 years. We were married for 13 of those. And there was a mourning, a grieving that I had to go through after that. And I tell everyone very transparently that even though I was ready to move on from the relationship, I completely underestimated the emotional impact of it all.
Mm.
I remember having several tearful conversations with my therapist, who I still have to this day. And she's a sister, and I love her because she keeps it real. She said, when we first started working together, did you really think that you were going to end a relationship of 16 years and just wake up and just be up and at 'em the next day? And I was like, yeah. She was like, what are you thinking? No, you got to have grace. You got to get space. You have to mourn what was, because this was not an acrimonious divorce. I mean, honestly, it was one of the most loving kind of separations that I've, witnessed firsthand, because divorces can get ugly. They can get nasty. That was not the case between us. We literally sat and negotiated everything ourselves. We didn't have a lawyer in the middle of any of that. And afterwards, being alone in my own home, it was entirely foreign to me. I didn't understand it. It didn't feel right to me. It was just like, the best way I could describe it is you take out the most full drawer in your kitchen and you just turn it upside down. Everything has fallen out. Everything is everywhere. And it was literally 2 years of a paralyzing depression that I had gone into. And ultimately, I got to this point where my therapist said, something has to give. We can't keep going at it the same way. I mean, this was just weeks in bed and, barely hanging on at work. And I had a conversation with my boss, who, by the way, was the best manager I had in my career. And we collaborated well. He was very empathetic. And I told him, even, 6 months prior to me going, I was like, I just got to a breaking point. I said, either I need a break, or we need to adjust my workload, or I'm quitting immediately. I cannot do this right now. And at that time, I was at the helm of a major initiative that we had going on. And, they were very considerate and said, we'll clear everything else off of your plate. Keep managing your department and keep managing this one initiative. We'll cover you on everything else. And I said, all right, because I had a strong team around me, I could do it. But then when the wave of the depression got even heavier and deeper, and like the therapist said, something's got to give. And my mind was, everything has to give. Job out, relationship out. I just had to pull the plug on everything. And I, kind of tongue in cheek, call it my Phoenix era. I said, I'm burning everything down and I got to build it all back up again, and I can't do that while I'm in it at the same time. And so I literally just did that. And that was the impetus for it all, coming out of that divorce. And it just was very, very hard for me.
What were you looking for in your travel?
So there were three main goals that I set out to do during this whole 6 month kind of career break, personal break period. And they were one, to understand the next chapter personally, two, to understand the next chapter professionally, and then three, and arguably most important, was to become unshakably clear in who I am, independent of anyone else. Because when you're with someone for as long as I was with the person I was with, your identity of who you are can often get wrapped up in that. I am who I am with. And then also add on top of that, I have a 20-year long career doing the work that I've been doing. I had gotten to the highest level that I'd ever been in my career doing this work at VP level, and had already kind of started planting the seeds for conversations of what a C-suite position would look like. What would a chief transformation officer role look like? It's a organic path for people that are in business ops and maybe don't want to go straight into a COO role. Maybe it's a CTO role. And we think I am my work. I am my person I'm with. And neither of those are true. You are who you are independent of those things, but you need to be clear on what that is. And that's what I had to figure out over the 6 month period. There was no formula for how I was going to get there. I remember my therapist would say to me, there is no timeline and there is no way around it. It's only through it when I was in the worst, right? And so I had those three goals. That's what I wanted to figure out during that time. And sure enough, through exploration, through transformative travel, which is why I'm so passionate about it, I was able to get clear on what my answers were to all of those questions. And the transformative travel piece, which I coach people on now, is the key that I use as a vehicle to really get to the other side for me, to have these kind of intentional scenarios that I would put myself in to learn more about who I was and what I loved and what I didn't love and all that kind of stuff. And then it helped to shape what was the next chapter for me. And actually, I even say it's bigger than a chapter. It's the next book, because it's too big just to be one chapter.
So much there. You know, you were talking about before that when you went to Vietnam, you didn't have any plans. You go someplace and not have any plans. What other kind of instincts did you have to break so you could better get to know yourself?
You know, I call myself an introverted extrovert. I know how to turn the switch on when I have to, but my default is actually to fall back a bit. And in order to get into conversation with other people, you got to light it up. You got to turn it on. There's a phrase that I hear often from a makeup artist that I follow on YouTube, Patrick Starr. And he says, life opens up when you do. And I found that consistently through my trip, that when I opened up to people, they opened up to me. And so I had to be intentional about opening up, intentional about having conversations with other people. I had to put aside the hyper planner nature that I have. I've spent over 20 years being a project manager at varying degrees. I say, even though I was at a VP level, they're just bigger projects at the end of the day, and bigger teams that are doing them. It's still a project. But I had to get comfortable letting go and letting more whimsy in, letting more surprise in, letting go of the need to constantly control everything, and to truly just let things unfold. And I'd say the third thing is I had to get comfortable with shaking things off very quickly. I am very transparent about being an emo kind of person. I feel all the feels. I sense everything that's going on around me. And it was intensified being in places where I didn't speak the language.
Yes.
And also being a Black American woman that sticks out like nothing else. I'm very tall. I'm full figured. I don't look like the people that I'm around. And the hair was a fixation for a lot of folks when I was traveling too. So sometimes I would have some unusual, shall we say,
Mm.
interactions that happened. And literally, what I would tell myself after it occurred was, we only got X amount of days left. I can't afford to stay in a funk the whole time, because then I'm going to ruin the next thing that could be coming down the pipeline. And so I had to like shake it off, sleep it off, wake up, new day, new focus, new things to explore. And I embodied that a number of times throughout the trip. And I mean, it's a good lesson just going forward, is sometimes just let things go as quickly as possible, because it's just not going to serve.
And to that end, how about your relationship with discomfort? How did you
Mm.
have to manage that?
I think the best thing that I can say on that is I just had to lean into it. It's like being comfortable with the discomfort, and being okay being in a foreign place. I leveraged a lot of tools to get around. I was intentional about immersing myself. I didn't use Uber to get around everywhere. I would get on public transport when I could. And
Wow.
yeah, between Google Maps and City Mapper, those are like my two go-to apps for kind of getting around on public transport. I think you just experience a place differently. I mean, think about when you're riding a bike or when you're walking versus when you're in a car. And if you're going on the same path constantly, how it looks different when you're walking through it, or it looks different when you're riding slower through it versus when you're just whipping past, in a car. The perspective was different. And I just had to approach every day with, all right, this is an adventure. We're going to try something new. We're going to figure it out. I may get lost along the way. I always told people, actually, on Instagram and my stories, I get lost at least once a day because I'm in a place that I don't know. Maybe I took a wrong turn or whatever. But then those wrong turns led to some really good adventures and, some unusual things that I fell into that are not items that you would find at the top of a TripAdvisor list, or, on a top 10 things to see if you go to a city kind of blog. You just gotta get out and explore and do your own thing.
I love that. I want to do this. I want to do this for myself, take solo travel, because when I was in just, God, such a horrible funk at work, I always knew I was like starting to get into the danger zone when I would daydream about where could I go, or I'd
Mm,
have dreams about running away.
yes.
Um, and I was just like, oh gosh, I can't do this. Do you remember the moment? I don't know if it's a day or just a moment when the clouds started to part for you and kind of the depression started to break?
Honestly, to keep it a buck, it was the day after my last day at work, because I no longer had that looming pressure of performance that was hanging over my head. Because here's what happens a lot of the time. This is what happened in my scenario. When you are that high performer and then you're depressed, you cannot deliver to the level that you normally work at. What happens in that swirl is that then you start to question, am I even good at what I do anymore?
Mm.
Am I capable of doing this anymore? I had a just straight up convo with my manager. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I got it. He's like, he knew what I was going through. He's like, no, the skill is still there. The talent is still there. You got this. You just are going through a hard time. And as much as I appreciated him sharing all of that with me, I could not embody it because of the weight of the depression that I was in. And so, when you ask when did the clouds lift, it was when I could at least eliminate that part of the equation that I was always having to wake up and figure out, how was I going to rise to the occasion?
Mm.
How was I still going to be the leader and present and engaging and all of these things while I'm feeling so heavy and hanging on by a thread, literally outside of work? And so once work was gone, I remember waking up that next day because I knew I didn't have any meetings to go to. I didn't have any executives I needed to advise. I didn't have any heavy deliverables that, somebody was knocking on my door asking what was going on and tracking against it. All of that stuff was gone. And then I literally sat in my living room and I was like, all right, what are we going to do? You got all the time now. And so the first week that I was off, I did nothing. I was in my house just, pottering around, cooking, which I absolutely enjoy. I've been on a cooking tear right now since I've been back home from my trip and inviting everybody over. And then I was like, all right, you did say you had 2 trips that you wanted to make happen, because I didn't have anything else planned beyond Antarctica because we had booked that months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to make the farm experience happen. So I was like, all right, let me find this farm. And then the snowball just kept going from there. It was from the farm to the icy cold world to the beach and then on from there.
Have you been surprised? Anything has surprised you about yourself in the process?
Yes. The biggest thing that really came together through the solo travel, because I'm a traveling lady.
Mm-hmm.
I love to be all over the place. At this point, I've been to over 40 countries.
Mm.
And a lot of the time when I travel with friends. And I enjoy my travel with friends. But I've gotten into longer and longer solo trips over time. And 50 days on your own is something entirely different. What it
Mm-hmm.
unlocked for me is that I learned the joy of solitude. I learned how to find excitement and pleasure just on my own without needing to be in the company of someone that I knew directly. And even when I was coming through the depression and getting out of that, I remember a quote that I read, especially for people that are coming out of a divorce. And it said, take solitude in small doses until it no longer feels like loneliness.
Mm.
And for a long time, I just felt lonely, and being alone and enjoying solitude. Those are all different
Different,
things.
very different things.
Yeah. And so I incrementally was taking longer and longer and longer trips on my own. I tell everyone, because they're like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. You did almost this 50-day trip. I say, you don't have to start that crazy big. The first solo trip that I took was for 3 days to the Jersey Shore. I live in Philly. That's an
Yeah.
hour and a half away.
Right.
Okay. We didn't go far. I hopped in my car. I literally went there for 3 days and fell into some fun adventures while I was there, met some new people that I'm still friends with years later to this day and keep up with them. It was just 3 days at the shore. And I remember walking into the hotel room and I just sat down on the bed and I very benignly said to myself, all right, what do you want to do? And I said, again, what do I want to do? Because when I've been in a relationship for so long, you're always doing everything in consideration of another person. Or even if you're traveling with a girlfriend or a friend or whomever, you're doing things always in consideration of others. And it's not always self-serving. And so to be in that space for the first time ever in my life, and I literally said, I just want to stare at the water for 5 hours. That's my thing. And so I had this tent for one. I called it my turtle shell because it was green.
Mhm.
And I stopped at a seafood shack. I got a lobster roll. I stopped at the little liquor store, got some canned palomas. I love a little tequila bevy
Yeah.
and some snacks from the Wawa. Set up shop at the beach. And for 5 hours, I just ate snacks and listened to music and watched the water and napped. And it was the best thing ever. And then just kept going on from there. There is a lot of power, I think, in being able to function independently. And that's not to say that partnerships aren't important. They serve their purpose as well. But to work to enjoy being in a space on your own is just, there's something beautiful about that.
All right. Throughout this interview, right? So we were nearing the time, like our allotted time. And I kept on thinking, I have so many more questions, just so many more questions. And I just wasn't ready to let it go. So I didn't have to. She stuck around. This is part one. We're going to have part two. It's not something we do often here, but I just was so locked in to what Lydia had to say. And, in the next part, which will air next week, we're going to dig more into the nitty gritty of how she did all of this, right? How she paid for the vacations to the new changes she's now making in her life. And guess what? She also got me together a little bit. Like when I tell you, I have had Lydia's voice in my mind since our conversation, and how she's already made such an impression, an impactful impression on my life. So I'm going to ask you all to return right here again next week for part two of this discussion. We also have the Act Up segment there. So she's going to tell you what you need to do today to get you, if this is something that you are like leaning towards, if this is your vibe, she's going to tell you exactly how to get started and doing this. All right. So join us next week for part two of this just dope conversation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to tell me what resonates. All right. See you next week. Thanks for listening to The Next Best Thing with Andrea Cline-Thomas, a Mountain Court Media production. The music was written, recorded, and produced by Gavin Casey, also known as Dark Purple. Now, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and write a comment on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to share it with friends. I hope this episode helps you on your journey. See you next time.